But I think what we are going to do first is to call on Linda Obiamiwe.
I'm Linda Obiamiwe, Senior Civil Servant at the Department of Works and Pensions. Firstly, I should say that I'm very pleased to be here, to have the opportunity to be amongst what I think is quite an impressive line panel, and especially to be talking about a subject that I'm particularly interested in, which is capacity building. So thank you, June, for asking me. I recall the conversation that we had about this. You want me to talk for about 15 minutes.
Yes.
And you want me to talk about my own personal experience of capability building. So I was listening to Mrs. Oyegun with interest, because I see that the focus of that presentation was very much around how, you know, we can access multilaterals and become, if you like, part of their own capacity, which is a bit of a flip in terms of what I will cover, seeing that I will talk to you about the actual act of capacity building within your own organization. So building capacity, not necessarily just in yourself, but in others for the organization. So I thought what might be useful as a precursor to the sort of storytelling that I'm going to do around my own experience would be two things. This hopefully is not, well, I hope in many ways, given the subject, that it is a bit of a like teaching grannies to suck eggs. But I think it's useful to reiterate these two things that I will say as prefacing the discussion, because it's good to keep them front of mind. So the first of it is what is capacity building? Or when we talk about capacity building, what are we talking about? And I think it is this. There are loads of ways that is defined, but I find this particular description of it helpful, which is that it is the development and the strengthening of the skills, the abilities, the resources, and the processes of an organization or a community so as to enable it survive, adapt, and thrive. And those key elements, the survival, the adaptation, and the thriving, is all we're about in this world. As individuals, as organizations, as communities, as nations, those things are really key. The other thing that I wanted to say, even before I get into what we did, is where does capacity building happen? And I wanted to emphasize the notion that capacity building should be happening at 3 levels at the same time, all of the time. So there's the individual capacity building. It's almost what we've been hearing with the presentation from Mrs. Oyegun about, you know, what we ought to be to work in multilaterals. So the skills and the unique experiences and the knowledge, the qualifications, all of that. At the individual level, that's happening. But even as that is building at the individual level, the organization is building the capacity also. And then in the wider organization, in the wider community within which that organization sits, the capacity building is also occurring. So it's occurring at those different levels at the same time. So I suppose the focus of this conversation, having said those things, is about a period of about 5 years where I was working to develop capacity in a very unique field. And I'm not going to share the entire story of how the capacity was built up because it would just take too long, and I'm conscious of the time. So I'm going to talk about it in highlights. I'm going to pick up the bits that I feel are particularly, there were sort of lessons learned for us, and hopefully there will be lessons learned for others. So the area in which we built capacity was behavioral economics. I heard Mrs. Oyego make a passing reference to it when she was talking about the various types of people that are recruited to multilaterals, from economists to social researchers and the like. Behavioral economics are another increasingly important, if you like, analytical function in all organizations. But in my organization, this was the area we were interested in building. We wanted to create a center of expertise, if you like, in the use of behavioral economics or behavioral insights, if you like. And we're also trying, beyond creating the center of expertise, we wanted to establish behavioral insights, the use of behavioral insights as a way of working within the organization. So I think it's helpful to set the context within which those goals were set. So this will be taking you back now to when David Cameron was Prime Minister of the UK, because I think it was towards the end of his time as Prime Minister, actually, he lit upon this notion that the use of behavioral insights would actually be helpful in government. And he created what was called then the Behavioral Insights Team. And it was based in the Cabinet Office at the time. I think the media very quickly named the Behavioral Insights Team the Nudge Unit. So for those of us who were paying attention to reading the papers actively at that time, we may have seen references to the Nudge Unit, because it was this notion that the unit was going to use new ways of working to nudge UK citizens to behave in ways that will enable government policies land better. But why was David Cameron interested in doing this at the time? It was because we were, as an economy, increasingly faced with ever reducing budgets in government. Resources were constrained. Behavioral economics was a way of investing little to achieve significantly larger or disproportionate impacts on the population, compared to the usual mechanisms of achieving that kind of change, which was legislation, policy changes, and the like. So it was innovation that was going to bring about savings. So as I say, it was increasingly becoming popular in government. So it wasn't unusual at all that as an organization within the wider public sector, that we were also interested in using it in the organization. So what did we do? The highlight of the actually achieving the goal, creating the center of expertise, embedding it as a way of working, are three things I'm going to focus on. Three, because as a behavioral insight specialist, you know that 3 is perhaps the maximum you remember. So not that there weren't many more things I could say, but I picked these 3 because these are the things that I don't often see that people do when they talk about capacity building, and I think it's a real missed opportunity. So one of the first things that I did as leading the team was liaise with the BIT. I talked about the Behavioral Insights team in the Cabinet Office, was to go to them to say, okay, you guys are already doing this stuff. We want to do it. What can we learn? And I think that more often than not, when we start the exercise of capacity building, we miss the opportunity to learn from the experts. We sort of, even though we all agreed, you know, that there's nothing new under the sun, and we know that whatever it is we're trying to do, somebody else has done it before us, it's still not uncommon for us to start from scratch, as if, you know, we are the ones doing this for the first time. So luckily we didn't take this approach then, and we started the conversation around this work very much in conjunction with the Behavioral Insights team. And through them, we got access to a wide network from academics, and I'll talk a bit more about academia in a minute, to practitioners, the people actually doing this as a business in the private sector, in the tech sector. And it was really important to work with this whole group of people to understand those skills, those abilities, those resources, those processes that I talked about when I talked about the definition, that we needed to put in place to actually create this center of expertise. And I was talking about lessons learned. The first lesson is around the use of academics, because often even when we go to those who have built capability before us or capacity, we often don't involve academia as readily, especially in this country. I think it's more common to do so in the US. In the UK, it's not necessarily our go-to, working in conjunction with academia to build capacity. But we used that model very effectively for the work that we did, because we built a whole database through the beat, built a whole database of academics, both in the UK and far beyond, as far out beyond the US to Australia, and made overtures to all of these academics, so that very, very quickly we had relationships, really good, effective working relationships with these academics. And they did two things for us. One, they contributed to that, giving us clarity around what needed to be developed, what we needed to focus on. But even more helpfully, they were practical, almost, to use a word that may seem really odd, they were like a tool in achieving the longer term objective of embedding that way of working in the organization. And the way they were a tool is what I'll explain now. So as I said, they gave us the expertise in developing a program of learning, of cultural change and all of that. But beyond that, they became a resource for a seminar series that we set up very early in the process. The seminar series was enabled the academics to come to our organization, to present their research, to share their findings, so that we understood what was the sort of latest, the cutting edge development in the field of behavioral economics. We're that close to what was happening. They were sharing that, but beyond that, they were staying in these conversations with us to help us understand how those findings had application for the work that we were doing. And all of these they did for free. So as you know, academics like to share their work, they like to speak at conferences, they like audiences, and we fully exploited that. We built that relationship so securely that it was that valuable, both to them and to us, and played a key role. Then the other thing that I thought was important in what we did that I don't see often when people are doing capacity building work is partnering, joint venture kind of approach. So one of the things we did very early on with the Behavioral Insights team was to explore their portfolio of projects and to identify some of those that we could almost be like learning partners on. So we didn't have the expertise or the capacity at that point to do any of those projects on our own, but we could literally support them to do it at that stage as a process of learning on the job, if you like. And that was a critical part of the capacity building work that we did. It really yielded a lot of benefits taking that approach. And then the final thing, because I'm conscious of the time, and this one to me is perhaps the most critical in capacity building work, and it paid dividends for us, is the active commitment to sharing your knowledge and your skills and your abilities and the processes that you're developing, even in the process of doing those things. So we didn't wait until we had a center of expertise before we were going off and talking at conferences also. We were sharing even as we were learning. And even as we were sharing and as we were learning anew, because that exchange that was going on was really, it created such a rich pool for us to tap into. So I think it's a good place to pause this idea of sharing one's knowledge as a way of learning more. And I'm sure that we'll come to it again, even as we go into a Q&A later in the discussion. But thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Linda, for your take on this. Mrs. Oyego has talked about the individual aspect, and Linda has taken us through a journey that she experienced as a senior civil servant in the UK government. And she's talked about 3 levels of capacity building, which is the individual level, the organizational level, and the community level. Some of the things that she's talked about is learning from experts, and also having learning partners, and also in terms of active commitment to sharing the knowledge while you are learning, that you will even learn more. So there will be questions coming out from that, Linda. So thank you for what you have shared